Hello. Today I will be featuring a ship that I have, that I did actually recommend for this ranked season, and that is of course the Bayern. Now the Bayern is the tier 6 German battleship, and it has quite a lot of things going for it. In fact, I often call the Bayern very well rounded, and I think it applies quite well to ranked as well. First of all, with a speed flag, you can actually hit over 26 knots of speed, which means that this is actually for a battleship very fast compared to the rest. Especially, I think is it Arizona that limps around at 21 knots or something similar. So it's significantly faster, of course. It's very tanky. When angled, especially, it's far tankier than pretty much any other battleship. Fuso might be a close competitor in tankiness, but overall it doesn't eat those random pens, whereas for example New Mexico and Arizona eat a lot of pens to the superstructure, and the Warspite just in general eats a lot of pens from every angle because the armor on it seems so squishy. The Bayern is significantly tankier. It feels probably one of the tankiest, if not the tankiest battleship, combined with the speed it has, and of course that it handles quite well. It also has good anti-air. It's just a very tanky and powerful beast. Oh, barely missed the Bayern. Should have been ready for him popping up. Now, it still has, of course, weaknesses. And in this case, German dispersion. German dispersion can be very hit and miss, of course, but in general, I found the Bayern to be pretty reliable when it comes to the guns. I mean, of course, you have downsides, but you are able to citadel other battleships quite easily, especially Fusos. I have found the 380 millimeters with that German velocity seems to be able to citadel the Fusos with quite a scary consistency, in fact. Now, Warspite is of course also exceptionally good at this, and Warspite has better gun accuracy, more reliable guns in that sense, but in return, of course, you have all the tankiness that the Bayern offers. I mean, if you compare the speed at which I reach this cap, I'm able to use this Leander smoke, I'm already at the cap, whereas I look behind me, the Fuso, Arizona, New Mexico, they are all trailing miles behind. And that is of course one of the advantages of this great speed. The anti-air, especially the long-range aura, is extremely good. So if you have issues with carrier, specking manual AA on this ship makes it very tanky indeed. In this build I actually have fire prevention, but I don't have vigilance, which I kind of miss. I would love to have vigilance, but it's not like having fire prevention is bad either. Another heavy hit, this case a 22k volley on the other Fuso and a citadel on him as well. So I've now managed to clip both their Fusos, which is of course a good start. This is a bit of a rarer game in the sense that there's 2 cruisers and only 1 DD each, but they kind of come and go. As usual though, there's plenty of battleships, and that's something you tend to face a lot in ranked this season. And it's for this reason that the Bayern is so good, because of course these guns, as I said, they are not very accurate, but they hit very hard, and they have great penetration, great velocity. And that of course means that it's extremely good against other battleships, because 380 millimeter means you can overmatch them, they can't angle against you, and the bad accuracy is offset by the fact that you are shooting battleships that aren't very good at dodging and are in general quite big. So the Bayern is an especially good anti-battleship if we put it that way. Ships like, for example, Fuso are extremely good at killing cruisers and DDs and such things, and Warspite is kind of okay against everything. But the Bayern is especially good against enemy battleships, and that's pretty much what you find what I will be targeting the most here, because that's what you are the best at in this ship. Now, a bit of an issue here, the enemy Fubuki has pushed through the cap and is of course pushing down here to harass and flank us. Ideally, our Fubuki should be here scouting and helping us, but our Fubuki is chasing the enemy Fuso, which is of course a pretty terrible situation, because, well, the enemy, we are much more clustered, whereas that Fuso is all alone, and it looks like the Fubuki can't even land torps on him. So what we need is him down here to help us, because we are quite at the mercy of the enemy DD here. And in general, you shouldn't run off and hunt the way our Fubuki is doing. It's just simply not worth it. And ideally, the enemy's Fubuki should be punished here. If our Fubuki was with the team, he would scout him, we would see the enemy Fubuki, and then we could all shoot him. Whereas the enemy team would struggle to even bring their guns to bear because there's so much island cover and such. But sadly our Fubuki is on a damage hunting expedition, which is sadly something that you see quite a lot in ranked. That is, DDs not really knowing their role, and generally when it comes to DD roles in ranked, your priority number 1 is capture points. Once you have capture points, priority number 2 is spotting. And that means of course counter spotting, which means of course spotting enemy DDs and in return preventing enemy spotting. And these are all very important roles, and like the torps are kind of an afterthought. While you fulfill these other roles, you find positions where you can also torp at the same time. But the problem with our Fubuki right now here is that, well, he kind of fulfilled the initial role of capping, but then he just kept sailing straight past the cap, and now he's just hunting damage, and he's not really doing much else. The spotting he's providing isn't valuable, because simple spotter planes and such can provide the very same spotting he is right now. The most important spotting we would need is spotting the Fubuki, and he's not providing that. Looks like the enemy Fubuki somehow managed to get himself spotted, which is of course good. And we have a fairly sizable lead at this point, but that won't last long because of course with a DD given the freedom to just continually torp and torp and torp, it's only a matter of time before he'll start getting some hits in. I ping him of course and try to indicate that we need him down here. It's the Russian server, so all I can do is communicate with pings and try to convince him. Speaking of the planes earlier though, that is one of the downsides. You have no plane on this ship, not even a spotter plane. And spotter planes are very useful, not just for the additional range they provide, but they also make shooting into smokes much easier, and they give you additional vision, which is very important. You can see on the other side of islands, you can see people that are close by, but for example on the other side of a smoke. These are all things that you can gain vision of with the help of a spotter plane, but because you don't have one, that option simply doesn't exist. So that's obviously a downside you need to consider. Note, I saw that this lander was slowing down, I saw that he was going to smoke, so I waited until the very last moment until I shot, because when the cruiser slows down in the smoke, that's when he's most vulnerable, and that's of course when you want to try to punish him. Sadly I only got 1 citadel and 4 overpens, but still I'll take it. It's still good damage dealt to a cruiser. He can heal of course, but citadel damage cannot be healed the same way as the rest, which makes it quite good. And here you see a big mistake being made by my teammate, the New Mexico. He, for some reason, even though we still had the lead, he decided it was time to push down the middle in between the islands. Now the problem with this kind of move is that getting into the situation he was in is quite simple. Getting out is nigh impossible, because of course the entire enemy team will be focusing him, and of course he's in New Mexico, which is a notoriously slow moving battleship, and in order to get out of there he has to give broadsides, he can't angle against everything. He put himself into a position where he can literally be crossfired by all the enemy ships, and of course when you do that, well, you are going to get killed. Our lander tries his best to smoke him up and save him, but it's too late. And that's really a very common overextension. Usually these kind of players are also the ones that tend to blame their team, like why are you camping, why aren't you helping me? But if we look at the scoreboard, until he died we actually had a lead. So why would we push? That's something it seems like such a simple concept, but it's very confusing for the average player. When you have an advantage, the ball is in the enemy's court. When you have a points lead, it's up to the enemy to push. And in general, pushing in this game is a disadvantage, because you have to be the first one who peeks around corners, who sails into the incoming fire, you have to sail into enemy torps, you have to push into enemy smokes. In general, pushing is a disadvantage in this game. So if you just hold your positions, you have the advantage, you can just wait for them to come to you and you can punish them for it. However, the average player doesn't really understand this, and thus it's very common that you gain a lead in a game and then your team thinks, well, we have a lead, that kind of means the game is already won, and then they start making these silly overextensions that then get punished. For example here, this Bayern, he is stopping right at the corner. Can I shoot him? Only with one shell. And this Leander is taking a massive risk. You see, he's reversing. I say negative because I really don't want him to do that move. He's reversing out to torpedo him. Once again, as long as he holds this position, the Bayern can't push around that corner. And if the Bayern tries pushing, well, the Leander can torp him. But if the Bayern is holding, then it's the Leander who has to push out around the corner. And suddenly the advantage I just spoke of has flipped. Instead of being in the hands of the Leander, it's now in the hands of the Bayern. And Bayern can just shoot the Leander who's trying to peek around the corner. Which is of course horrible, horrible, horrible. Once again you see, Fuso is the first one who has to come around the corner. And he eats massive damage. And here of course we see the power of these 380mm guns, and one of the reasons why I recommended this ship. The sheer penetrative power of these guns means that, especially in close ranges, the Bayern is extremely strong against other battleships. Especially the Fuso. I am angled enough, and you can see all those hits. Like, let's listen to this sound. Did you look at my health pool? Notice I didn't take any damage. At this range, a Fuso trying to shoot my angled armor, no damage. No damage at all. And that's just how tanky the Bayern is. You can absorb an absurd amount of hits as long as you remain angled. And you see the firing angles? I am able to maintain this angle. You see he shoots, bounce, bounce, over pen. That's all the damage he did. With this kind of angling, you are absurdly tanky, whereas when I shoot back, well, he can't bounce my shells, can he? And this kind of advantage is of course why the Bayern is one of my recommended ships for this season. Even though it lacks the accuracy, the sheer capacity this ship has to bully other battleships is immense. Now Fubuki has finally pushed down there to spot this enemy Fubuki, but he's lacking support. Our Budionni is taking this weird flank. He's finally close enough to pen me, but if he's close enough to pen me like that, I'm close enough to citadel him straight into his barbette. I shot him underneath the turrets, and I didn't even use all my guns, and he just got obliterated. And that is of course the power of the guns. If you get to real close enough that you can start penning the Bayern properly, that means he can pen you back even harder. So usually not a situation you want to be in. And our Fubuki gets killed by their Leander, whereas our Leander really isn't doing much at this point. In return, I managed to trade the kill back though, and we still have a lead at this point. We still have a lead. Ideally now we would want to defend this camp, but you saw what happened to that Fuso fighting me? Well, our Fuso clearly didn't watch, because he decided to do exactly the same to the enemy Bayern. He tried to go close enough that he could brawl him, and let's just say the Bayern is the one ship you don't want to be brawling as a battleship. Really, it's that one ship you don't want to get into a brawling situation, because the Bayern is so very good at brawling. And of course it has the extremely strong turtle back at close range, which cannot be penetrated even at close range, which means of course you won't be citadeling him pretty much ever. Angle to minimize the damage. I need to kill this guy off quick and try to turn around. The problem is, while I was dealing with this guy, my two cruisers were snoozing behind me. Sorry about that, my phone. While I was dealing with this guy, my two cruisers behind me were snoozing, and they didn't reset the cap even once. I kind of wanted to turn right here, but I think the Arizona is aiming at me, so I turned left instead to angle against his shells. I only have 15k health, so a good volley from the Arizona could have wrecked me at that point. So I was forced to turn this way to make sure I don't get deleted by the Arizona, because my health pool is so low. My heal has come up though, and now we're down to a 3 versus 1. The problem is they have given up the cap. This is a huge deal, because of course caps generate a ton of points in ranked. You get, is it 9 points every 5 seconds, which of course means that whatever lead we have right now will not last long at all, simply because they have the capture advantage. Now at this point the Leander decides to YOLO in and torp him, okay? Questionable decision, but if our Budionni pushes in at the same time, this will be perfectly fine, because Arizona is very, very slow, has incredibly slow turret traverse, and there's even a smoke there for our Budionni who can use it to rush him. So if our Budionni rushes in and kills him right now, we should be perfectly fine. I kind of want to push closer to this Arizona, but if I push any closer, if I angle sharper, I won't be able to bring my guns to bear. So ultimately I want to keep my guns to bear, because if the Arizona turns for the Budionni, I want to be able to punish him. Okay, so Arizona realizes this, so he stays angled to me, so Budyoni should have a free time of rushing him, except it's been too long, and the Budyoni isn't reacting. The Budyoni pussied out. That's really what it came down to. While the Arizona was focusing the lander, the Budyoni should have gone in. If he had rushed in right away, we had plenty of points to spare. He wouldn't even have mattered if the Budyoni had died. As long as he gotten his torps off, he could have killed him. And now we're in serious trouble, because the Budyoni, I cannot kill this guy in time. In fact, my reload is going to take too long. They generate points too quickly. I am getting quite frustrated. The Budyoni is just sitting there. I'm pinging him. I'm trying to get him to realize that he needs to move his ass. He can't just sit behind the island. This kind of people lack the awareness to realize that he missed his window. He pushes in now. But it's of course far too late. He missed his window. He had a really good opportunity to rush in and YOLO him, because the Arizona would have had to deal with cruisers on both sides, Leander on the left, Budyoni on the right. And Budyoni of course has insanely good anti-battleship torps. It has 5 torps per side, meaning it can absolutely decimate battleships easily. But sadly, he missed his opportunity and just sat back, and this game ends in a defeat. 171,000 damage and 4 kills, high caliber, but sadly not enough to clinch the victory in this game. But I do felt like this game did highlight the strengths of the Bayern quite well. In fact, if we look at the team score, 1.3k base XP. My team, of course, very less than impressive when it comes to their play. The Fubuki that second probably was one of the main reasons that we lost. The fact that he never spotted the enemy Fubuki and was sailing around on some sort of adventure, never really landing any torps, in general being quite useless. And of course it didn't help that our Budyoni at the end was too focused on survival instead of just realizing that he could have traded his life as long as he landed some torps and we would have won. But not much that can be done. I felt like this game still showed the strengths of the Bayern, the way it was able to tank an absurd amount of damage, and the way it was able to deal an even more absurd amount of damage really shows the strengths of this ship. And looking at the detailed report, 55k tanked, not too much, 1.5 million potential, not that much once again. Spotting damage will be notoriously low for the Bayern always, once again, because you like that additional spotting plane. But the overall damage is of course very impressive, 167k with the AP shells alone, very consistent high damage, and you can see pretty much all their ships have been eating that damage. So the Bayern, I do stand by my original recommendation. I think the Bayern is a very strong ship for ranked. It's just that people are quite often misplaying the ship. It's not so much as a DD deleter, it's not really that strong against cruisers. I mean, you do good damage against cruisers, don't get me wrong, but you have the propensity to overpen cruisers quite a lot because you have so much shell velocity on the German battleships. That really your best target is absolutely punishing the enemy battleships. You just want to bully enemy battleships. You can tank their damage and you can deal massive damage to them, and you should be playing to that strength, should be using the speed to get close and just like instantly discourage any sort of battleship maneuvering, any sort of enemy battleship pushing. And that, in my opinion, is the strength of this ship. The ability to bully the enemy battleships, which is quite a rare thing. Anyway, let's move on to my recommended build for this ship. Right, starting off, we of course have the modules. Now, priority-wise, I would probably get the hull first, because it gives you so much. First of all, it gives you a massive chunk of anti-air, because look at the default anti-air. It practically doesn't exist. You have no AA. So you go from no AA to having really respectable anti-air. In fact, quite strong anti-air, especially this long-range aura. So hull first for the HP, the AA, the rudder shift, all the goodies. Once you have that, you can get the increased range. Although at the range of 16.1 you're already fairly comfortable, but range or speed, either one is good. Both are great. In fact, the speed might even be better. It kind of depends in what kind of situations you end up. Ultimately though, you want to get them both as soon as possible. Consumable wise, premium damage control, premium heal, you should absolutely run both of them for ranked, and well, for randoms as well, but especially for ranked. Upgrade wise, we have main armaments mod 1 to increase that turret survival, aiming systems mod 1 for that better dispersion, and mostly because there's really not much point running anything else. Damage control system 1 And 2, I think you can easily get away with not running steering gears on this one, because you got a 13.9 second rudder shift, which is quite good for a battleship, and the increased tankiness is, in my opinion, more valuable against the fires and, well, even potentially flooding. But then again, against floodings, if you run the premium repair, that will come up way faster than the flooding will actually run out. Ultimately though, I still prefer this simply because of the fire prevention, or well, fire reduction. Captain perks wise, I actually like running a priority target on, well, I've been running it on the Russian server, and I've been experimenting on the other servers in ranked, because it does give you a good idea of when DDs are torping you, because every time they switch between torp and gun view, the number goes up and down. Because as you can see, this says, this skill, if you read the skill carefully, you say the situation awareness indicator will show the number of opponents that are currently aiming at your ship with main battery guns. Keyword being main battery guns. When they use torps, they don't show up on the number counter, but when they use guns, they do. So if you're sailing in the open and you have 2 people targeting you, and suddenly it drops back down to 1, and then it hops back up to 2, you can just tell based on that thing alone, if you pay attention, that the DD just torped you. He switched to his torps, he torped you, he switched back to his guns, and he's targeting you again. And that is something very, very important and quite valuable if you learn to use it. So this one is of course fantastic. Follow it up. Your turret traverse is pretty damn bad, so I would recommend getting expert marksman first. Follow it up with superintendent, you want that additional heal, and then get concealment. If your higher rank, concealment isn't as important, but honestly the stealth on the Bayern is so great at 11.6, which is very, very good for a battleship. I would probably recommend getting it quite quickly. Once you have concealment, get adrenaline rush. Now at this point there are some options. I would personally probably get vigilance as the next one, because tier 6 Bayern does not have any hydro, so that torpedo warning is very, very good. And then with the last 4 points, get fire prevention. On this thing though, I have fire prevention first, and of course ideally I will get vigilance later. I just don't have the captain points since it's my Russian account, but I think because of the meta, because of how many DDs there are constantly compared to how few cruisers you're facing, I think running vigilance is more valuable than running fire prevention. So ultimately this would be the optimal 19-point captain build. Flag wise, priority 1 is absolutely increase your healing, followed by reduce the fire even further since this stacks. And I would go for the speed flag, since that pushes you up to a respectable 26.3 knots, which is very, very fast for a battleship. And after this, faster reload and faster heal, and then you can buff your anti-air if you want, secondaries like I buffed here. There's a lot of things you can buff, and then of course the usual XP things since I'm leveling my captain. But the base things is of course the heal and the fire reduction. Anyway, that was my Bayern commentary. I hope you guys enjoyed it.